Today I'm going to show you how I turned this tiny pocket-sized camera into my dedicated high-speed camera rig that's capable of recording slow motion video up to 1,000 frames per second. It has unlimited power, a remote trigger, a bunch of other features that I'll get into in a minute. And the best part is you can build this entire rig for right around $500. And so I have everything laid out right in front of me here to build this rig. I'm gonna go ahead and just put this together and talk about, everything that I chose for this and why I chose it and what it does. And of course, once this is all put together, we'll record some 1,000 frame per second video and see what this rig is capable of. Alright, so first of all, the camera we're using for this rig is the Sony RX100 IV. So about a year ago, I made an introduction video about this camera, kind of talking about, the 1,000 frame per second video that you can record with it. And I would recommend checking that video out. I'm gonna link it down in the description. But long story short, this is essentially the cheapest dedicated camera you can buy that can record video at 1,000 frames per second. And so the reason this is kind of a big deal, if you've ever watched something like the slow-mo guys or Mythbusters, I'm sure you've seen those crazy slow motion shots of explosions and flames and fire, balloons popping or whatever they record. But typically to get those slow motion shots like that, you need a crazy expensive camera. Like, the slow-mo guys and Mythbusters would use cameras that are tens and tens and tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars to get those slow motion shots like that. Which of course, spending tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on a dedicated camera to record slow motion shots like that you might only use every once in a while or just, play around with. That's just not even in the realm of possibility. And so the thought of getting those types of shots with a camera that's, $500 for this entire rig, including the camera, is honestly a pretty big deal. And like I said, this is essentially the cheapest camera you can buy that can record 1,000 frames per second like that. Now there are some other options and some other cameras and even cell phones that can record 1,000 frames per second in the similar price range to the RX100 IV. But I think overall, this is about the best option. You have a 24 to 70mm equivalent lens in this camera, so it's not just a fixed focal length like a cell phone would be, even if they can technically record the same frame rates. I do think overall the RX100 IV is the best and, like I said, pretty much the cheapest option to get that type of frame rate. And so that's kind of why I chose the RX100 IV for this. Like I said, go check out the other video I made about this, kind of introducing recording 1,000 frames per second with this. And now for pricing with the RX100 IV, it definitely varies quite a bit. This is a fairly old camera, so you're gonna have to purchase this on the used market. And now the three main places that I personally use to buy used camera gear like this are eBay, KEH, and MPB. But of course, you can pretty much pick this up anywhere else that you can buy used cameras. And the pricing for this camera is gonna really vary a lot, but anywhere between $300 and $500 is a pretty good used price for this. And now, what I would actually recommend, and what I did with this camera, which you can probably kind of see already, is trying to find one of these that's a little bit beat up and a little bit in, the well-used category. So you can see mine has a bunch of dents and scratches all over the place. The screen is cracked on it. However, it's still pretty much fully functional. And I actually picked this one up for less than 300 bucks. I think it was right around 250. And honestly, if you can find one like this, that's still fully functional or mostly functional, but kind of beat up, maybe a cracked or scratched screen, dents and dings all over the place. I really think that's the perfect way to buy one of these, especially if you're gonna use this as a dedicated high-speed camera rig like mine. You're gonna feel a lot better off putting this at risk, getting it close to things for recording that high-speed footage and, kind of risking it a little more to get those cool shots. Rather than if you got a more expensive one that's in great condition, it's gonna be tougher. You're not gonna wanna risk it as much as, if you got something like mine. I don't even mind throwing this thing at whatever I can just to try to get those cool shots, even if I do risk possibly breaking or damaging the camera a little bit. So that's the rundown on the camera. Let's go ahead and get this thing built and talk about all these other parts that I have to this camera rig. So first up, actually on the front of the camera here, I glued on this 37 to 49mm step-up ring. So originally this camera doesn't have a filter thread, so you can't thread on ND filters or polarizing filters or anything like that. Now there might be other ways or other options to get a filter thread on your RX100, but what I actually did is just took a 37 to 49mm step-up ring, put a couple drops of Gorilla Glue on it, and just glued it right to the front of this lens. It didn't change the functionality at all for me. It still works perfectly fine. But now it has a 49mm filter thread on here. Now, like I said, there's probably better, maybe safer ways to do this, and I can't say I'd recommend putting glue on your cameras. And if you do this at your own risk. But the reason I actually put a filter thread on here is so that I can put on these step-up rings, of course, to make it even bigger. And then I actually have diopter filters that are kind of like magnifying glasses that I can thread onto the front of this to get super close-up macro shots at 1000 frames per second, which normally this camera isn't capable of. So you kind of need to add a filter thread to this to be able to put diopter filters to get those extreme macro slow motion shots, which you'll definitely be seeing some of those shots, so stay tuned for that. All right, so next up we have this cage right here. So this is just a cage that slips right on the RX100. This will add a lot of rigidity to this. It'll add mounting points and everything like that. And it'll make it a lot more durable. If you do end up dropping this or, hitting it with something, this cage is gonna make this camera a lot more durable. So I'd recommend picking up one of these cages. Now, all this stuff I'm gonna link down in the description. And just to be fully transparent, those all will be affiliate links. So I will get a small kickback at no extra cost if you do use any of the links down in the description. But here we go, got the cage on the camera right there. That's definitely gonna add a little bit of weight to it, but it makes it a lot more rigid, a lot more strong, durable, and I would just honestly always recommend having a cage on this. So here we go, cage on. Now I can throw on these step-up rings to put on my diopter filters. And then next up, I actually have this dummy battery right here. So this just plugs in through USB. This is the other half of it right here. So you can see it's like 6 feet long right here. So you can plug this into a wall outlet, just a USB wall outlet, or a USB power bank, which is what I use. And with the USB power bank, you're gonna get a ton of runtime, or if you plug it into like a wall outlet through USB, you're gonna get unlimited power out of this camera, which is definitely needed. The normal batteries that come with the RX100 cameras don't last very long. They're tiny little batteries. I would 100% recommend getting a dummy battery and either, like I said, a USB power bank or just plug it into a wall adapter so you can get unlimited power out of this camera. And it'll just be one less thing to have to worry about. So dummy battery, get that locked in right there. And there we go, that's all set right there. And then next up we have this right here. So this is actually a JJC remote. And so this just plugs right into the USB in the side of the camera. And this is basically just a camera remote. So you can start and stop. You can actually zoom in and out, which is pretty nice. You can take photos, you can turn it on and off, stuff like that. It's a really simple remote. And this has about a 3-foot long cable on it, but it looks like it has a micro USB on one end and mini USB on the other. So you should be able to get an extension cable and pretty much make this as long as you want. So if you are recording something in slow motion that you want to be kind of far away from, I found this 3-foot cable allows me to be far enough away for everything that I've done. But like I said, you can even get an extension to this and pretty much have it as long as you need it to be, which, like I said, I think that's pretty important, being able to kind of stay away from the camera depending on what type of slow motion shots you're trying to get. Whether you just don't want to get wet from a balloon or, a fire or something like that, or if you're recording something dangerous like an explosion, you obviously want to be as far away as possible. And that's kind of my thoughts behind having this remote here. I think it's pretty necessary so you don't have to be right next to the camera at all times. So let's go ahead and get this plugged in right here. And then there's this one last piece that I'll talk about once I get this plugged in. All right, so there we go. We got unlimited power. We got a remote trigger right here. We got a cage to add some durability to the whole rig. We have these step-up rings glued to the front of the lens here so that we can throw on some diopter filters to get some macro slow motion stuff. Now, last but not least is this right here. This is just basically a little cable clamp. And so what this is gonna do is stop one of these from getting ripped out of the side of the camera, especially this remote trigger cable. This is pretty delicate and it's just a micro USB. If this gets tugged at all, it's just gonna snap the cable, snap the port, break something on the camera. It won't be a good time if you tug this in any way. And so what I have here is just this little nitsy cable clamp essentially. And so I can just wind these cables up on the side of the camera, clamp them down, and then you can kind of tug these all you want without having to worry about ripping the battery out or ripping out this remote trigger. So let's go ahead and get this attached right here. There we go, so that just kind of clamps these down. Like I said, now I can kind of tug on these a little more and it won't put any strain on the actual port on the camera, or the end of the cable right here. This is definitely needed to save the ports in your camera and just give this whole rig some overall extra protection. And so now if I go ahead and just plug this in through my USB power bank right here, and then you can actually press the power button right in this remote. So I'll just do that to show you how this works. So there we go, press the power button. Power's right up there. And there we go, we have the completed high-speed dedicated camera rig right here. You can see even with all this stuff on here, the cage, all the different cables and stuff, this is still a really small camera. And if I go ahead and, power off here, it'll pull the lens back in there, close the screen up, and you can see this is still a really small portable camera, especially if we compare this to any other dedicated high-speed camera that has, you know, a remote trigger, that has unlimited power like this, that can record 1,000 frames per second with a 24 to 70 millimeter equivalent lens. I mean, you really just cannot beat this in terms of pricing, size, and weight to be able to record true 1,000 frame per second video with a dedicated camera like this. And so that's pretty much the rundown on this entire rig, what I chose, why I chose it. Now it's time to see what this thing is actually capable of. Let's go record some 1,000 frame per second video and try not to kill this thing.